It started with a strange fluctuation in the sky, a shimmer of starlight bending and refracting in patterns no telescope could explain. Deep space observatories around the world picked up anomalies, areas of inexplicable gravitational pull that suggested something enormous had entered the solar system. At first, scientists speculated it might be a rogue asteroid or a dark, cold comet. But when multiple observatories triangulated their data, a more chilling picture emerged. The anomalies were not random, they were coordinated. Within hours, high-orbit satellites began dropping offline. Communications failures spread across networks that had been stable for decades. NASA and the European Space Agency issued internal alerts, and the International Space Station reported intermittent power disruptions. As these warnings trickled out, amateur astronomers were the first to spot the truth. Dozens of enormous objects, black as coal and sleek as knives, had taken up positions around Earth. They did not reflect sunlight, did not emit radio waves, and seemed to absorb radar pings like a sponge. The world reacted as one might expect, panic. News channels blared warnings. Social media exploded with conspiracy theories, doomsday predictions, and blurry amateur photos. Military forces scrambled to high alert. And above it all, the ships remained still, silent, and unnervingly calm. Keiko Mori was one of the first to grasp the scope of what was happening. A research astronomer based at a Japanese observatory, Keiko had spent her life studying faint radio signals from distant galaxies. When the blackout began, she was in the middle of processing data from an interstellar probe. But as the disruption spread, she noticed a curious signal buried in the noise, a faint, irregular pulse emanating from the fleet above. Most of her colleagues dismissed it as interference, the result of a planet-wide communications breakdown. But Keiko had seen patterns like this before. To her trained eye, the signal was not random. It carried a rhythm, an intentional structure. She worked into the early morning, using a cluster of local servers to run analysis after analysis. The patterns she uncovered weren't just communications, they were scans systematic. Planetary-scale scans. The alien ships weren't simply waiting. They were studying. News from other observatories trickled in, confirming her suspicions. The fleet's presence was triggering faint ionospheric disturbances, barely measurable but consistent. If the ships were scanning the planet, Keiko wondered, what were they looking for? Resources? Weaknesses? Something more abstract? But Keiko's questions went unanswered. Governments around the world were too busy mobilizing their defenses. By the time she sent her findings to international science networks, the narrative had shifted. The media were already calling it a prelude to invasion. Images of missiles being prepped in silos filled television screens. Major cities were placed under emergency lockdowns. Keiko's warnings that the aliens might be here for something other than conquest fell on deaf ears. The powers that be had already assumed the worst. And perhaps they were right to fear. As the sun rose over a tense, silent Earth, something changed. One of the larger alien vessels emitted a visible burst of light, a short, controlled flash that reached the planet's surface in under a second. The pulse didn't cause immediate damage, but it left sensors spinning and instruments misaligned. Whatever the beam had done, it was deliberate, calculated. The next step of the aliens' plan, whatever that might be, had begun. It was then that the first decipherable alien transmission was intercepted, its message simple, chilling, and impossible to ignore: Earth. The next target. Keiko sat at her workstation, staring at the decoded text. Her colleagues whispered in frightened tones as news outlets around the world flashed the phrase across screens and news feeds. Governments issued statements urging calm, but it was too late. The world was spiraling. Economies froze. Markets plummeted. People fled cities, crowded into shelters, or boarded planes to places they thought might be safer. But where could anyone go? The ships were there, silent and unyielding, poised to strike from above. And yet, Keiko couldn't shake the feeling that the message wasn't a declaration of war. She returned to her scans, poring over the data. The way the aliens had positioned themselves, the patterns they'd chosen suggested something more calculated. Their actions were too precise, too surgical. It was as if they were following a sequence, not preparing for battle, but carrying out some kind of methodical operation. The phrase "next target" didn't sit right with her. Target for what? She didn't have an answer. Not yet. But as the countdown to chaos ticked forward, Keiko knew one thing for certain: Earth wasn't being attacked. It was being judged. Deep inside a weathered control room at the European Space Agency's listening station in Spain, the day began in an eerie calm. Staff had grown used to the steady drumbeat of bad news over the past week: satellites failing, telescopes blacking out, and now the looming alien fleet. But that morning, the low hum of activity in the station was interrupted by a beep from an old console in the corner, a console no one had checked in years. One of the interns, a young astrophysics student named Elena, turned her head at the sound. "What's that?" she asked, frowning. She stood and crossed the room, her voice barely carrying over the quiet chatter of the morning shift. The console in question was connected to a long-forgotten probe, sent out decades earlier to study Jupiter's largest moon, Ganymede. Its systems were antiquated, its instrumentation primitive by modern standards. It hadn't transmitted anything of note in years. Yet here it was, lighting up like a Christmas tree. "Elena?" A senior technician glanced up from his monitor. "Something wrong?" "I think we just received something from the Ganymede probe." Elena squinted at the screen. The signal was faint, choppy, and riddled with gaps. But it was unmistakably a data transmission. She quickly pulled up a log of recent activity. Nothing. Then, all at once, her screen filled with raw code strings of characters that didn't make any sense. Within moments, the room was on high alert. The signal's timing was uncanny. Could it be related to the fleet? If so, why use a decades-old probe instead of sending the message directly to Earth's modern satellites? Speculation ran rampant, and for hours, a team of experts worked to clean up the data. They filtered out noise, reassembled broken packets, and finally managed to decode a fragment. The first clear phrase stopped everyone in their tracks: "We have miscalculated." The room fell silent. Elena stared at her screen as more lines of text emerged. "Your world may hold what we lost. We do not desire conflict. Respond before the weapon deploys." The message struck like a thunderclap. The weapon, a term the world had been dreading, was now confirmed. More chilling still, the aliens admitted they had made a mistake, though what kind of mistake was not immediately clear. The phrase "your world may hold what we lost" left the scientists puzzled. What had they lost? And why would Earth possess it? The ESA immediately transmitted the message to other space agencies and world governments. Within hours, an emergency council convened at the United Nations. Heads of state, military leaders, and top scientists debated the meaning of the transmission. Some argued that it was a ploy, an attempt by the aliens to lower Earth's defenses. Others believed it was genuine, a desperate plea from a civilization that had become trapped by its own technology. Keiko Mori, who had been following every update from her observatory in Japan, was one of the few scientists who thought the message rang true. She had long suspected the alien fleet was acting out of something other than conquest. To her, the phrase "what we lost" hinted at something profound, something intrinsic to life itself. But her theories were dismissed by more senior figures who favored military preparedness over speculation. Meanwhile, the countdown continued. Earth's militaries scrambled to position their forces, but no one could agree on what to do about the message. Sending a reply was risky. Some worried it might provoke the aliens into attacking sooner. Others argued that ignoring it would guarantee humanity's doom. Keiko, however, felt sure that the aliens weren't asking for surrender or begging for resources. Their message was clear: the weapons countdown was running, and the only way to stop it was to engage somehow. They had miscalculated, which meant their attack wasn't born of malice, but of a mistake. Something in Earth's makeup, its environment, or even its people, was tied to what they had lost. If humanity could understand what that something was, perhaps the weapon could be halted. But as the hours ticked by, the governments of the world remained frozen. Each moment of indecision brought the planet closer to an unknown reckoning. And so, with the alien fleet hanging silent and the weapons charge building to a peak, humanity stood at a crossroads, teetering between fear and hope. As the alien fleet hung motionless in orbit, their cryptic message haunted every corner of Keiko Mori's mind. Your world may hold what we lost. What could they mean? She sifted through data, her lab a flurry of activity. Every satellite scan, every intercepted pulse, every faint electromagnetic ripple was logged, dissected, and cross-referenced. What had the aliens once possessed that Earth still had? Resources seemed unlikely. Humanity's metals and minerals were hardly unique. Nor did Keiko think it was technology. If these beings had crossed the cosmos, they were far beyond anything humans could offer. No, it had to be something more fundamental. What if, Keiko thought, it wasn't what Earth had but what it was? She pored over old studies on planetary life signatures. Earth's magnetic field, its atmospheric resonance, even its natural radio emissions were distinct, shaped by billions of years of evolution. Could the aliens be searching for something they themselves had left behind long ago? Something organic, chaotic, and untamed? Keiko found herself drawn to one line in the alien transmission: "We do not desire conflict." To her, it felt less like a threat and more like a plea. Then came the breakthrough. Late one night, Keiko uncovered a pattern in the alien scans. They weren't focused on Earth's cities, its resources, or even its technology. They were scanning deep into the planet's magnetic field, mapping out its electromagnetic heartbeat. Unlike the cold, mechanical signals the alien ships emitted, Earth's field was alive with complexity. The interaction of the solar wind, the shifting molten core, and the biosphere created a constantly evolving, living pattern. Keiko hypothesized that this living signal was what the aliens had lost. Perhaps in their pursuit of technological perfection, they had left their biological forms behind, merging into machine consciousnesses that no longer resonated with the electromagnetic fields of living worlds. Over time, their entire civilization might have become cold, sterile, and disconnected. And if their ancient systems had classified planets by these resonances, then Earth teeming with life would appear as an anomaly. A threat. Or perhaps, a reminder of what they once were. Her theory was met with skepticism. Her colleagues were focused on interpreting the message as a simple demand: stop the countdown or face destruction. But Keiko insisted that the countdown wasn't just a weapon, it was part of a larger mechanism, an ancient protocol designed to purge any world that resembled the aliens' own biological past. To halt the process, Earth needed to do more than send a message back. It needed to disrupt the very logic driving the weapon. But how could they demonstrate that Earth's biological nature was not a threat? How could they communicate something that would alter the programming of an alien weapon without understanding how it worked? Keiko realized the answer lay in the signal itself. If Earth's natural electromagnetic patterns were what made it the next target, then amplifying them might cause the weapon systems to falter. By broadcasting a complex, chaotic signal, one that reflected Earth's vibrant life, it might be possible to confuse the weapon's logic. In essence, Keiko wanted to send a message not in words, but in the language of life itself. Gathering every resource she could find, Keiko set to work on crafting the signal. She used data from the oceans, where the tides created natural electromagnetic pulses. She incorporated the patterns of electrical storms, the subtle resonances from deep beneath the Earth's crust, and even the rhythmic bursts of energy created by human activity. The signal became a tapestry of Earth's uniqueness, a chaotic, pulsing pattern that no artificial logic could fully grasp. As she pieced the signal together, she thought back to the aliens' message: "We have miscalculated." That miscalculation wasn't just a tactical error, it was a fundamental misunderstanding of what life really was. By sending this signal, Keiko hoped to show the aliens or their ancient systems that Earth wasn't a threat to be purged. It was something precious. Something that might even help them rediscover what they had lost. With time running out and the countdown nearing zero, Keiko uploaded the final signal into the observatory's powerful transmitter. It was a Gamble single transmission that carried the essence of a living world. She sent it out into the void, hoping that on the other side, something still remained that could hear it, understand it, and change course before it was too late. Keiko leaned back in her chair, her hands trembling as the transmitter powered down. The signal, the culmination of days of frantic research, was gone, hurled into the void. The alien fleet remained silent, their enormous ships still poised above Earth. The final seconds of the countdown ticked by, and she could only wait. At first, nothing happened. The world held its breath. Global news outlets continued running frantic reports, governments remained on the brink of declaring martial law, and the streets were eerily quiet. But in the vast network of military and scientific installations monitoring the alien fleet, subtle shifts began to appear. Instruments detected a slight wobble in the massive superweapon's energy buildup. Instead of a clean, linear increase, the power readings fluctuated, as if something in the mechanism had begun to stutter. In Keiko's lab, one of her colleagues whispered, "Do you see that? The energy signature - it's destabilizing," she finished. Her heart raced. It's working. The fluctuations intensified. Instruments on Earth and in orbit reported irregular spikes and dips, and the ship's previously predictable patterns of activity broke down. One of the smaller vessels moved out of formation, its dark silhouette tilting at an unnatural angle. Keiko quickly analyzed the data. The transmission had reached them. Earth's chaotic electromagnetic resonance had been amplified, and now the alien systems were struggling to process it. But then came the real test. The final seconds of the countdown passed, and the superweapon's energy buildup halted altogether. A long silence followed, one that stretched across the globe, filling living rooms, command centers, and observatories with an unbearable stillness. And then, abruptly, the weapon's readings disappeared. The enormous vessel that housed it dimmed. The countdown was over, and no catastrophe had arrived. "Keiko," her colleague said quietly, "you did it." Before she could respond, another message arrived. It was directed specifically to her observatory's array, transmitted in a language that now seemed easier to decode. The alien's reply was starkly different from the first. Where their previous communication had been cold and detached, this one was more measured, more curious. "You have done what we could not. The weapon is dormant. You are as we were, long before we fell. We will not return to this system. Preserve what you are." The message ended as abruptly as it had come, and then the fleet began to move. The massive ships, which had hovered motionless for days, turned in unison. Their shadowy forms glided out of orbit and disappeared into the blackness of space. It was over. Keiko stared at the screen in disbelief. The world was safe, but the alien message carried a somber warning. Their acknowledgement that Earth represented what they had once been made it clear that their ancient civilization had reached a tragic conclusion. They had become something so alien, so removed from their origins, that their own systems no longer recognized their past selves. In their attempt to perfect themselves, they had lost their identity, their chaos, their vitality. Earth had been spared not by technology, but by its unpolished, vibrant nature. As the days passed and humanity began to recover, Keiko felt a mix of relief and unease. The alien fleet was gone, but the message lingered. Could humanity, too, reach a point where it became unrecognizable? Would Earth someday lose what made it unique, what had saved it in the end? These questions haunted her as she stood beneath the night sky, watching the stars that had once held silent invaders now return to peace. The world would move on. People would tell stories, governments would make plans, and scientists would search the cosmos for other signs of life. But Keiko would always remember that in the end, it wasn't humanity's weapons or technology that turned the tide. It was the planet's restless, unfiltered voice, its chaotic symphony that had spoken to the stars and changed everything. And as she looked up at the endless expanse above, she resolved to protect that voice. To ensure that Earth's heartbeat would never fall silent.